Today we're going to be focusing on the great controversy with regard to machine matzot, and their really the first machine was introduced in 1838, in France by the name of a fellow by the name of Isaac Singer. I don't think about the same time that the sewing machine by a different singer was being invented, and really for the last almost 200 years now, that the controversy has waxed and waned over the years, and we'll talk about some of the historical side as well. But we're very far removed, and my guess is that how many of you have ever gone to a matzah factory? When was the last time? Right?
40 years.
Okay, it's a good elementary school trip that they bring people to. And some people, are any people here like part of a chabura to bake matzah? Right? No one here. So, okay. So some people make their own matzah. Good. So first, let's just see. This is just to get us into a sense. These both videos were made about 20 years ago by a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, Rabbi Yitzmotzen. Some of you may know him. He now works at Nefesh B'Nefesh. Anyway, but so this is what goes on in terms of today in a typical hand baking factory. We're all members of the Bris Kolo 20 years ago. They went to bake matzah.
Ladies, where's the sneakers here? I mean, you guys, it used to be much better. The guys dance while they do this. The guys let the ladies do really.
We're going to see, by the way, you'll see that the gender roles is something which goes back hundreds of years.
Wow.
Very good. That's it. Whoops. That's fine.
All untouched by human hands.
Come on, they wash their hands.
They had to tell us that. How bad could it be?
Fabulous.
So that's the in terms of going on. Now, if you were, this is a woodcut from a Haggadah. I think it's the Prague Haggadah, but I'm not sure. But it's after printing, so we're talking about in the 16th century, okay, an early Haggadah. And as many of the Haggadot, some of the Haggadot do this as well, not so much in terms of illustration, but all of our Haggadot just about begin with Bedikat Chametz. So in many of the earlier Haggadot, so they use this also as a means of teaching Halacha and illustrating the Halacha quite literally. And so they would start with the matzah making. Okay, and the matzah making, so you can see what's going on here. You have the clearly non-Jew here, who's being they are discussing the price for the wheat. They're sifting it. There's the watermill in the background, whether it's going to be ground into flour, right? And then you have the matzah making. And so, as I mentioned, the roles are haven't changed all that much in the last 500 years, at least in terms of the factories, right? You can see certain things. First of all, there's the rolling out. Here, you already see the holes. Okay, those holes are actually very important, and we'll talk about it on a halachic level also. But it impacts on the nature of the matzah. The holes. So you see it in crackers in general. Well, just about all the crackers that you'll buy have some kind of perforation. What that does is it allows the carbon dioxide to escape, and doesn't allow the dough to rise. But it also does. This is and this is something that I had a discussion. As you may be familiar with, Sephardim have, or many Sephardic communities, some have gone over to the Ashkenazic side, but they have, but traditionally Sephardim have soft matzah, right, which are more like pitot, lafot, that type of consistency. We'll see some pictures of it now, but you can't make soft matzot if you perforate them. In other words, you can have flat bread, soft bread like a lafa, but you can't have a soft loaf of anything when you start making those holes. Right? So even if there's something last night I looked in, looked in a YouTube video for making pizza dough, but to have ready-made bases for pizza, right? So they perforate them so that they become harder, and then they can be frozen easily, and then you take it out, and then it absorbs the sauce, and then it becomes soft. Right? But the perforation makes it into a cracker type of consistency. So the moment that you see a perforation, we'll see it even in earlier Haggadah, so that means that already that community was having a hard matzah. Because they couldn't have had a soft matzah if they didn't have that perforation. But here, just other things that you see. So again, you have the gender roles in terms of the rolling out, the kneading of the dough there, etc. Here, besides the baker, but you have an early machine, and this is actually going to come up in the halachic argument about using machines. This is in other words, in terms of, this is used to flatten the dough, right? The first record of it that we have is in the 13th century, written record of it. It might preceded before, even hundreds of years before, for all we know. But that's the first written record. It's in the Meiri, talks about this. And basically, it's a very heavy, and I think it was generally already even made of, it was generally wood still at that point. Today, if you go into matzah bakeries, I didn't notice in the video that we saw if they showed that, but there's just this past week. So I took the boys to the yeshiva. We took the boys from the yeshiva to bake matzot. Not that what they produced really would be good for any seder, but so the run that we have, they have this kind of machine. In fact, it's a primitive machine, and so it's a very heavy rod, and which allows them to flatten the dough and to begin to get the mixing going much more efficiently, and being able to
Stainless steel today.
Yeah, today it's stainless steel. Right. So here's an earlier manuscript. I think this is from the 14th century, if I'm not mistaken. But here you see again somebody actually making the holes, right over there, right in the bottom. Not nearly with as much flair as the fellow that we saw in the video, but he's doing that, so you know already in the 14th century they're already having hard matzot. This is an Ashkenazic Haggadah. And again, so it's, here it's already, this is the biur chametz, just that you can see, and then you're going down, they're making the matzot. One of the things, and this is actually something which is very important, which we don't even think about anymore. For most of Jewish history, matzot were made fresh. In other words, the matzot would be made on Erev Pesach, and to this day, the Teimanim continue this custom. Then every day of Pesach, they'd make new matzot. And that was discontinued for the most part because of two things. First of all, on a halachic level, concerns of there being chametz on Pesach. Also because, three things really. Also because the moment it becomes a hard cracker as opposed to soft matzah, so there's no real need for that anymore. Because the whole purpose of baking matzot fresh is that you're going to have fresh bread, right? If you have, the Hillel sandwich, that the korech, if you think about it as a lafa with some lamb and a little lettuce, a little charif, I guess you could have it, the maror. So it's not such a bad sandwich, right? It's a nice thing to get down. But if you have stale lafot, right, it's not so good. Right, so they'd bake it fresh, and then through the course you wouldn't be able to have those kind of matzot last the entire week, because but by the end of the week you'd have not only stale matzot, you'd also have moldy matzot. Right, and the Gemara has discussions about finding matzah with mold, right, and not knowing is it chametz or not chametz, etc. So you can only understand that because they're dealing with soft matzot, which you put into the bread box, and they're not all that different than the lafot that you're going to be eating, which are chametz. And then you have a question: is it kosher lePesach, not kosher lePesach, etc.? How to look at it. But once matzot became crackers, right? So then they can store for much longer. Whereas the matzah baked on Erev Pesach is not going to taste any different than the matzah that was baked 2 weeks earlier. Right? It's going to stay the same cardboard. So that is so that's another reason. And the third reason is because of the question of scale. Right? Most people would bake matzot in their own homes. Right? And if you go online today and you want to say, I saw one that was posted during COVID, and you want to know how to bake matzot in your own kitchen, it's doable. Right, you can make your own matzot, even the crackers. So if you're doing it in a home oven or in a small chatzer where there are a few families who get together in the communal oven around, so then you can make it every day. But once you reach a point where you're dealing with much larger communities and people don't have the baking facilities in their own homes, so then just being able to have that kind of scale of every day of Yom Tov, that's another reason why that practice fell out of practice. The interesting, there's a lot of halachic discussion for this year, for Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbat, when you are now not able to bake on Shabbat, and you're baking they bake their matzot on Shabbat. So there is a lot of tshuvot. Is it better to bake your matzot on Friday or on Motzei Shabbat, so that it's fresh for the Seder? But the downside of that is that Seder is going to start even later, because now not only do you have to worry about doing everything that you have to do after Shabbos, but you also have to bake your matzah. So that's the and different poskim, and it's brought in the Shulchan Aruch as well. So even by the time the Shulchan Aruch is being compiled in the 16th century, there are still people baking their matzot fresh, and so that discussion reflects it. But already here you can see that at least in Ashkenaz they've already moved over to the thinner matzah. Here too, the matzot are being used. You can see there's like a Kabbalistic symbol. This is an Amsterdam Haggadah from the 17th century. So this is so here the right. All of the stages are there. Here's the person grinding the wheat, the water that's being left. The baking is, I don't think that this is actually how it actually looked, but you can see that they're baking the matzot up there are pretty big, and they seem to be thick. Right? You can see it even more in I think the next. We'll get back to that. We'll find an example of it later on. But just because these are not moist matzot. They're the dry matzot, and I assume that the fire there is to throw the whatever leftover dough there is into the fire, so that you don't have chametz. But the matzot, just because they're hard matzot, doesn't necessarily mean that they were thin. Right? The matzot that we have, and we're so familiar with with thin matzot, and you have written records of this as well. They actually, quite possibly, they used two different kinds of matzot. They had a thinner matzah for eating, and a thicker matzah, which they called the rib eisen matzah, right? Because they would use it on a grater. That's also an indication that it was a hard matzah. You can't grate a soft matzah, but basically to make matzah meal, right? So they would make a much thicker matzah and then run it over the grater, right? And there's discussions about how thick it should be because of concerns for it becoming chametz. So here in the next scale, so here you have a picture from Iran. This is from the 1940s or 50s, right? And you can see that they're also doing the same, but the matzot there were still soft matzot. Here is the result, a nice big, you can also use it as a Purim costume. But it's soft. That's not a hard matzah, and you see there are no holes. And it's just made as a soft matzah. And the teimanim as well to this day. Some of you might recognize that's Rabbi Dr. Ari Zivotofsky. There, and the matzot, of Teimani matzot are very much are thicker, and they're also soft and made fresh. So we come to the question of the hand baking. The matzah, we're going to see this as a major issue in terms of the question of moving over to machine matzot. So the oven, if you're dealing with a wood-heated oven, the temperature in the oven gets to something like 700 degrees. Okay, and pizza ovens as well. I mean, they get very, very hot, and that's why the matzah takes maybe less than 30 seconds to go from dough to burnt. So this is the same type of matzah. You can see those matzot are much thicker. Again, presumably that they're drawing it more or less to scale, but the oven hasn't changed that much. We have, this is just I'm sorry. So this is the oldest known picture of a matzah bakery. Goes back to the photo of a matzah bakery is 1890. You see that the Italian matzot there are pretty thick, right? Much thicker than what we expect to see as our matzot. Right? This is in the 1940s, right after the war. So they had in 1946. They set up in the DP camp a Matza bakery. There's an American chaplain who's overseeing what's going on, right? And they use this is already working with some machinery. We'll get back to that, and that's fine. That's now we move over to the machine, and we'll talk about some of the issues of the machine. So this is actually the same bakery in the same day that he took it. This is in Yad Binyamin. So between each run, they clean it very carefully. So that's instead of the pole that they're using. So they're just running it through those rollers. So he's taking challah there.
Yeah.
Now we'll get back to that. Remember, the challah in the hand bakery was after it was baked. So we'll talk about the difference in a minute.
Square now, not round.
And they come out square. It's interesting on the different sides of the ovens, different kinds of kippot. More sociological. But everybody has a phone, right? Okay. Mozart, yeah. Mozart. So so this is the first machine. Okay, this is well, it's not. I shouldn't say it's the first machine, even though it says the first machine. It's the first drawing that we have of a machine, and it is actually from 18. I think here it's cut off. It's 1855. It's actually from in the United States, in the Lower East Side, Cherry Street, the corner of Pike. And you can see certain things here. First of all, I mean, it's a bad drawing, but the matzot that are coming out are thicker, right? And they're round, right? They're not. At that point, the machine, the baking was still done. Even though it looks like those are baked, that's not baked. That they're just being churned out in order to be put into the oven. Okay, the original machinery was only was there for the flattening of the dough and cutting the matzot. What they would do is that they would, and this is, we'll see some of the issues in a minute when we take a look at some of the poskim, that the first run, remember you have 18 minutes, so the first run would cut the machine would cut it into circles, which was the way that most people have their matzot, because after all, in the hand matzot, you have to roll it out. It rolls out in the circle into a circle. So that's how that would be cut. The scrapings would be gathered together and go through the machine again, but this time there wasn't time to cut it into circles. Then the second run would be cut into squares, right, to save as much dough as possible, and to use by the time that it would be ready for a third run, then it would already be too late in terms of the chametz. So that was one of the issues. So so you see that already this is remember the first matzah bake machine is is 1838. This is 1855. It's already reached America. It's spread throughout all of Western Europe by that point in time. Interestingly enough, so if you take a look at this sheet, I don't know if you can read, maybe we can turn the lights back on. So this is a tshuva, which was printed. Maybe some of the Brits here can help me in terms of the Occident. The Occident apparently was a precursor for the Jewish Chronicle, or a competitor to the Jewish Chronicle. And in 1850 or 1849, this letter appeared by Rav Natan Adler, who was the Rav Rashi of England at that point, of the United Kingdom. And it was published because there was a discussion. This is only 12 years after the first machine has been introduced. So there's a discussion: can this be used for making matzah? So he says. You can hear what the person, in respect to the question concerning the mode of baking Passover bread in America. I will now proceed to give you the following answer. Having inspected the drawing of the machine, he hasn't seen the machine in person, contained in the letter of Mr. Emmanuel Goldsmith, bearing the seal of your Parnas, of your Parnas. First, regarding your complaint that they do not use water which has stood overnight, so that's a technical issue, not regarding the machine at all. Water, it's known as mayim shalanu, right? Not our water, but water that has rested. The Gemara wants make sure that the water has cooled off, because even though we talk about 18 minutes, the assumption is that dough, if it is warmer, as most of us know from the kitchen, if the dough is warmer, it will rise faster, right? The leavening process goes faster when it's heated. So we want the dough to be as cool as possible, because if it's because the 18 minutes might be less than that if the dough is warm. So the water, the mayim shalanu, is water that has been left overnight, and that cools the water. Remember, there's no refrigeration. You don't have running water, so you have to draw the water. You don't want the water coming out of the well if it's a little bit too warm. Now, there's some other. It's also based on ancient cosmology in terms of the assumption of how does the sun circle around the earth, but that's besides the point for us right now. So this is just a side. Do they use regular water? Do they use river water that's been drawn? So that's not really our issue per se. Number two, respecting the scruples that you expressed, that the doughs made are larger than a sheer challah. Right, so that's something that we saw in the video. Right, the reason why the challah was taken after it was baked is when you are kneading it by hand and doing it so quickly, the amount of flour that's used will not be enough for the shear of challah. So what they do is they take the challah after you have done enough round batches of the matzah, and then you're going to take it from the baked product, because all of the matzah together is more than the shear of challah, but in the pre-baking process, it's not large enough to take it as dough, so you have to take it as a matzah. So now with the machine's able to handle much more dough at one shot. Okay, already even in the very primitive machines that's a concern. So now the sheer challah, the doughs made are larger than a sheer challah. So I have to state that although it is not true that in London they make the doughs larger than this, because I have given the workmen strict orders not to exceed it and given my personal attention to the matter, still as the machine in question is so large and powerful, it's almost impossible for any little piece to be left unbroken and unneeded. It is not necessary to confine the size of dough to a simple sheer challah when such an instrument is used. They say there's no need. The whole concern is because of the size that we're dealing with when we're working by hand. But if you're working already, with the state of the art of 1849 in terms of these machines, so then you have much larger dough. By the way, I saw in an article just the the jump, but at its maybe not at its height, but when it Manischewitz, which at the beginning of the 20th century was far and away the largest matzah manufacturing factory in the world, so they were able to produce 1,200,000 matzah a day. Okay. And that also is a very important factor. And that sociological factor is that you have all these people coming into the cities, right? You don't have the wherewithal to easily bake matzah. Also, there's in the 19th century, leading up really up to the Shoah, there was a huge jump in terms of the birth rate and the number of Jews. Right, you have about the beginning of the 19th century, there may be 2 million Jews in Europe. Right, by the at the eve of World War II, there were 10 million Jews in Europe, plus 6 million in America. Most of them had come from Europe, right? So in less than 150 years, the Jewish population had grown almost 8 times, and so a huge population growth, and just being able to handle that kind of demand, so required the machines. Number 3, respecting your scruples about the mitzvot or matzot shimurim, right? Those are special cakes designed for the first 2 nights of the Passover, not to make them by machine. Okay, so this is another issue which we'll see in a little more depth in a moment, is we remark that although one who is truly anxious to fulfill the word of the Lord should bake them through means of an Israelite only, nevertheless it will be enough if an Israelite commences to mix the dough and stands by whilst it is made. Okay, so this is something we'll come back to. In other words, the halacha of, we call it shmura matzah. Shmura matzah, so is there the grain is watched from the time that it has been harvested to make sure that it doesn't come into contact with water, because once the grain is cut, so then in theory the kernel can become chametz even before it's been ground into flour. Right? So that's where that level of shmura comes. But in addition to that, or as part of that, it's a pasuk. It's a din d'oraita. Ushmartem et hamatzot. The pasuk says, and watch the matzot. So you can understand on a pshat level what shmartem matzot means. Right? Pay attention to that. You're eating matzot. Be careful to be eating matzot. But already in the Gemara in Pesachim, the Gemara says that you have to have in mind that you're making it for matzot mitzvah. In other words, if you were to purchase a non-Jew's matzah, non-Jew were to make matzah, and you know that it's kosher, right? You have you watch the process. It didn't become there was no chametz that was involved, so you can't use that for the mitzvah of matzah on Leil HaSeder, because it wasn't done for the purpose of making it into the shem mitzvah, matzat mitzvah. So it needs to be made specifically for the purpose of matzat mitzvah. This becomes a little bit later in the Rishonim, but it's brought lahalacha that even if you have a non-Jew who is making it, or for that matter, the Gemara talks about a child, someone who doesn't have, cannot have proper intent, his or herself, and they're making the matzah, and an adult is right there watching the process. Right? So that is not good enough, halachically. It's not chametz, and you can eat it during Pesach, but it's not something that you're allowed to use for the mitzvah of matzah at the Seder. So then one of the major issues that's going to come up is that once you're dealing with something like this, right, is this that's going on, is that a l'shem mitzvah matzah, or is it, the machine, right? We're reaching the point where the machine is smarter than we are, right? The machine will say we can't use the matzah made by humans, right? But at that point it's not quite there, right? This is that machine is stupider than most children, Most children. Anyway, but that is so if that's the case, so is that the fact that there's a worker there, so is that l'shem mitzvah, matzat mitzvah? Right? Can you use it? Even if you're saying that it's not the problem of chametz, can you use it for Leil HaSeder? So he wants to claim, and this is what some of the poskim are going to say, is that since as long as a Jew is involved in the mixing of the dough, that's enough. Right? So that's going to be enough. Now that question is going to become a little bit more complicated as as technology advances. In other words, in something like this, so you see, okay, so is this really different, right, than that pole that we saw that was already being used in the 12th century? So it's more advanced technology, but it's essentially the same technology. It's just another rolling instrument, another tool that the person is using. But when it becomes steam-powered, and then electric-powered, and the entire process was the video that we saw was and part of the reason why that happens is to expand, if you will, the reach of the poskim. But that's a pretty primitive mechanized process. Whereas in the more advanced factories, from a technological perspective, human hands don't come into contact with the dough at all. Right?
There's a Jew who pushed the button.
It's the Jew touched the button, right?
He turns on the machine.
So that's the question that the poskim deal with. Is that enough? Right? That I turn on the button and I say l'shem matzat mitzvah, right? Right? And then I go have my coffee break.
Yeah.
Right? So is that enough? Right? Is the fact that I starting the process, or even if I stop the process at each point and I press another button, is that considered doing the action? This, by the way, is an incredibly complex sugya because it affects many different areas of halacha. Questions with regard to if I'm using machines on Shemitah, is that considered that I'm working the land? Right? If I'm sitting in the seat of the tractor, right? Maybe I'm not doing it, just the machine's doing it, right? You have and today, right, which is already exists. In the agribusiness, so they have tractors that are autonomous, right? The program, they don't have to, it's not just Waymo, right? And before you know it, right, all of these machines are going to, because it's a relatively straightforward thing, literally. It'll just plow in a straight line, so you can really have everything totally automated, right? So is that working the land, right? So the poskim deal with that. What?
Machine that makes tzitzis.
Okay, tzitzis making machine. Same question. L'shem mitzvah matzah. Is it on Shabbat? Is that considered to be malacha or not? Right? If you're doing it, right? Is that a doraita? Not a doraita. So all of these questions, and they also it touches upon liability, right? If I have a closed automatic system, right, which causes the injury or even death of another person, right? Am I the murderer? Right? Or it's just a machine. I just press a button. Right? Is that going to be, so there are different levels. A very complex sugya. But so I'm just touching upon it now. But that is a major question with regard to the matzot, and you may be familiar with people who will eat hand matzot at the Seder and machine matzot the rest of the week. And that's the reason, not only because of the question of shmura matzah, in terms of that's more of a question of a fear of chametz. In other words, the only time that you have to, al pidin, be worried about the matzah or the dough becoming chametz is once it's been mixed with water. In other words, at that point, you have a concern, right? The flour and the water have come into contact, and now I have 18 minutes. Right? That's the concern. The shmura of either guarding it from the time it is flour or guarding it even from the time that it's been harvested. So that's an additional chumrah, in effect, to say there's no reason why I should think that the flour has gotten wet, because if the flour gets wet, I'm not going to be able to use it. It's going to spoil. But just to make sure that it hasn't, just to make sure that there aren't some kernels that have gotten that have been in contact with water and now have been fermented and mixed in with the rest. So that's another level of chumrah that we have, but that is the but that's a chametz issue. The issue, though, once it has come into contact with the water, that is actually, as I said, a din d'oraita, and you might not be yotzei the mitzvah of matzah if that's not fulfilled. Finally, what he says, the fourth observation, that the dough is cut in 4 pieces, that a fourth part is left without being handled within the influence of the heated steam of the machines for fully 18 minutes. Whereas he's talking about not just a hand-operated machine, he's already talking about steam machines. This is 12 years later from that time. And so that will create the what we said before, the concern that even before it gets into the oven, it's become chametz because it's a hotter environment. The room itself is much too hot. So he basically says, well, that's just a question of what we would say in the yeshiva world, mitzios. That's just a question of, well, is it hot or is it not hot? And he says, Mr. Goldsmith, in his letter to me, denies your assertion, saying that the time of finishing the dough occupies but 9 minutes and there is no heat in the kneading room. It is therefore the bounden duty of the governors of congregation, whom God may preserve, to investigate the matter carefully through the statement of credible witnesses, etc., and make sure that it's true. But if it isn't, so then there's no reason for it to say that it's chametz. If it is, then it has to be banned. And then just to end the tshuva, because this is really what it is. But they ought to take a special means to work the machine, which is to make the matzah through means of wheel and crank, turned by hand power, as is done in congregations in Germany, France, for instance, Kassel, Metz, and the like, in the hopes that they. So, in other words, for the reasons that we said before. In other words, he's already saying, I want to try to avoid the problem. I can have steam machines that are being used, but that minimizes the active participation of the human being and the need for da'at. So I'd rather have him turning a crank rather than it being totally automated or as automated as possible. So this, and then we'll take a look at the last couple of minutes just to. This is, if anyone knows who this person is, I would, to try to track that. I just love that. I have no idea. But what you have here is, this is Rav Moshe Feinstein. This is Rav Soloveitchik. This is the Streitz Matza factory in the late 50s, early 60s, and they're examining the matzah machines. This is Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, Zatzal, as a young man without a beard. And he's showing Rav Moshe just the workings of the machines and how it's being cleaned, etc., between the different runs. When it comes down to, now if you take a look at the other this other handout, so the first major controversy with regard to the use of machines breaks out in Krakow, in Galicia, in southern Poland, at the end of the 1850s, in 1858, 1859. And it becomes really a cause célèbre. It starts with letters which are printed in the first Hebrew language newspaper. I'm trying to remember the name. Hamelitz, I think it was. To look it up. And some of the letters are there's a story, there's a backstory behind it as well. But with leaving behind, if you're interested, I'll be happy to send you many articles that have been written about it. There's a wealth of literature in English and in Hebrew on this, really very fascinating stuff. But basically, the question comes that this is the end of the 1850s. The machine's been around for 20 years already, or machines have been around for 20 years. They've been accepted throughout Western Europe, Germany, France. We saw England as well. They've been accepted. They're being used. They make it to Galicia in the end of the 1850s. About 20 years later. And now the poskim there are dealing with it. Is this okay or not? So the leading posek, and these are Gedolei Olam, Rav Shlomo Kluger, who was of Brody, which is near Krakow. So he is, the two people who are the protagonists here are arguably the greatest poskim of their generation. In the 1850s. So one is the Shlomo Kluger, and he bans it. Okay, apparently he didn't actually see the machine in process, but from what he's been told, so he says that it's forbidden, and his letter is printed in this work. It had already been allowed by another great posek, Rav Yosef Shaul Nathanson, who is the Shoel Umeshiv, that's the name of his Sefer Shalom Umeshiv, and he had said it was okay. Letters are published again and some of them are written by Rabbanim who are not of the same standard, who did not necessarily know how great Rav Shlomo Kluger was, and they're very disrespectful letters that are published. And Rav Shlomo Kluger decides that he has to, along with some people who are egging him on, he has to take a stand on this particular issue. So he publishes a work called Modal Beit Yisrael, a notice for all of Beit Yisrael, in which there are, I think, 15 different tshuvot of written different rabbanim of the area who agree with Rav Shlomo Kluger. Now, Rav Nathanson who has been allowed for this, so now this is a shot across his bow. So he publishes I forget whether it came out in time for that same Pesach or immediately after Pesach, what he calls bitul de moda'ah, right? The nullification of the moda'ah. And here he has, again, 10, 15 shuvot of Rabbanim, also great Rabbanim. You look down the list, this is like a who's who of mid-19th century Gedolei Yisrael on both sides, who come out in favor of the machines. Okay, and it continues for quite some time. Basically, if you will, the breakdown becomes between more or less Misnagdim and Chasidim. Right, Misnagdim are for it, and there will be another explosion of controversy over it about 30 years later, as the machines are more sophisticated, and there are Gedolei Yisrael. There's even there's a commercial aspect to this as well. The Manischewitz company was the sponsor of a major kollel here in Yerushalayim, and so Rav Kook has a letter in favor. Rav Tzvi Pasach Frank, Rav Charlap, was all of the that are going on, but not only, if you will, the people in the more moderate camp, but also Rabbi Yisrael Salant are very much the Prushim in Eretz Yisrael are. Not only do they say that you can use the machine matzah, they say it's preferable to use the machine matzah, and we'll see some of these arguments already go back before. And it becomes again basically the Hasidim and the Misnagdim. So you can see from this picture, right, that here we have in the Litvisha Rabbanim, they have no problem with it. Okay, this is we're not dealing with your modern Orthodox rabbis here. So this is the in this really excellent article by Hildesheimer and Lieberman. So I just took 2 pages. They make just a table of the core arguments for and against. Okay, so let's take a look. So on the left hand, it's on page 230 here, in the book 38 of the article. So so in favor, so this starts with Rav Natanson. So he, in his Bitul Moda, so he basically starts by saying, you never saw the machine, right? So anything you say, you can't accept it because you just never saw it. Okay, so that's nothing, and there's no argument against that. He hadn't seen the machine; he'd been perhaps misled, perhaps not. Now, let's take a look at some of the arguments, just in the order that they bring it here. It's always on the right-hand column. It's always been Jewish practice to bake round matzot, and Jewish custom may not be changed. Square matzot copy non-Jewish practices. Chukot goyim, since they resemble the wafers used by the non-Jews on their holiday. Okay, so that's the argument. Okay, who came first? Right. So we always made round. They made square. You start using square, right? It's it's going. Who knows where it's going to lead to? Okay, to mixed dancing. Fine. So now on the left side, right? What was the response to that? So in some localities, it was the practice to break square matzot. So first of all, Jews have been doing it for a while also, right? Now remember, they're making square matzot simply because of it's much easier, and you're saving dough, because otherwise you have to throw out the dough. If you're making hand matzot, so then everything could be round. But if you're using a machine and you're cutting it with a mold, so then you have to either use it as a square matzah, or you're going to have to throw away a significant percentage of the dough. Okay, and on Shavuot, square bread would be baked, right? So there's minhag Yisrael to bake square bread on Shavuot, apparently. Consequently, there's no fear that this would do copying of non-Jewish practice. And the Halacha makes no distinction between round and square matzot. Right, you can make it any shape. In fact, in World War II they made V-shaped matzot, V for victory. Okay, this I don't think they actually made it in this shape, but this is from 1916. Okay, when the swastika was still an American Indian symbol of quality. Right, so somebody got the idea advertising. I'm going to advertise my matzah with the swastika. That's like the Mahadran. So this trademark stands for supreme quality. So things change. But anyway, so the shape of matzot is there. I'm sorry.
One of the countries I was in on the trip, which I can't remember now. The swastika was a symbol that this is a school.
Okay.
Another meaning for what it was.
Okay, everything changed.
There's nothing to do with that.
All right. Oh, well, there have been. I still don't like seeing the symbol. Anyway, so now on the other hand, there were sociological issues that are involved as well. This is why this is written up so much, because it becomes really a flashpoint for so many different areas in terms of just the development of things. The baking of matzot by a machine harms the livelihood of the poor, who wait every year for the Pesach season to earn their livelihood for baking of matzot. In other words, who are the people who are actually doing it? The poor people. So now you're taking away their jobs, right? This is a basic argument against industrialization. Right? So what's the counter argument? No special, first of all, it's interesting, no special obligation provided for the poor by baking matzah. Okay, this has been a way to give them some money, but there are other ways that you can give them money, and so we have to find another way of doing it. One of the things that he doesn't say that other people can say is that it makes matzah cheaper for everybody. Right? We know the difference between the price of hand matzot, or it's gold has gone up, more than 3,000. It's 3,000 an ounce, which is basically the same price as hand matzot, right? And so and matzot that are baked are much cheaper by mass production, which help people. But also the argument that it's giving them employment, so he points out there's a downside to that as well. Most of those engaged in the manual baking of matzot are empty and frivolous individuals, non-Jews, women, and children, who are neither expert in the laws of baking matzot nor careful concerning it. In other words, you have to be careful about the chametz, right? If people are bringing their, I don't know, if it's a non-Jew and he's rolling out the matzah and and he brings his ham sandwich in, right? So that's not exactly going to be, kosher mahadrin. And apparently this is an issue. The problem on the right side, the problem of chusar dat exists for the machine. The machine lacks koach gavra, the action performed by human agency. That's what we discussed before. So it's already a very early. We saw it even before this, 8 years earlier, that Rav Adler dealt with this. So the argument is the same as what Rav Adler said, namely only the rolling of doughs performed by the machine, while the kneading and baking are done by humans. Therefore, there is no problem with chusar da'at. And this is, by the way, this view is also shared by some of the rabbis who prohibit the machine for other reasons. In other words, even though you can mix and match, you don't have to agree with all of the arguments against. You can say that this argument is valid, that argument isn't valid. So that's another aspect, but again, as I mentioned, as things become more and more mechanized and automated, that becomes more and more the flashpoint for the problem. Flipping the page, and this is really also a Metziut question. We saw different pictures here, how careful they are in terms of cleaning the machinery. Right, and machinery becomes more advanced. It's easier to get clean. Both in terms of the material, be able to take it away. In meant to be totally fair for the hand camp. Many factories. You may have heard of the notion of 18-minute matzah. What does that come from? All chametz has to be 18 minutes, right? The first 18 minutes of the day. The first run of the day, when you haven't had any chametz, they would really clean it at the end of the day. The next day it's totally clean. The first run, that's the 18-minute matzah. Right? Everything else afterwards, there was an assumption that there might be a little chametz mixed in, but it would be batal. Right? Because you can have bittul of chametz before Pesach of up to shishim. So there might be some chametz mixed in, right? And so this is a fair argument. So he says, that there are problems with cleaning manual as well, and that you're right, you have to keep it clean, right? But in practice, in the factories, they weren't always quite as careful.
The first 18 minutes don't matter, because when you
I'm sorry?
The first 18 minutes don't matter, because how you clean the night before.
Right, but then you had more time to do it. Anyway, so this is the basic idea. The one last thing that I'll just mention, which becomes an issue and was a major issue, as you can say, in the mid 19th century. This is when reform is beginning to hit stride, and so now you come to Poland and you say they do it this way in Germany, right? Gewalt. Right? What do you mean they do it in Germany? Right? The next thing you're going to have an organ in my shul, and you're going to. It starts with a machine matzah, right? And next thing we're going to be reading Mendelssohn. So this is the basic idea, and that's exactly what he says. The use of machine is suitable only for German Jews who incline towards innovation. Right? So that argument runs in Poland, and that's okay. And what's the argument? German rabbis are also God-fearing. Yeah, they're also okay. right? But that's it really starts there. All of these arguments, and some of these arguments ad hayom, and with the technology as it changes, each particular change in technology, I've had another part of this year for another time, which I didn't get to, of trying to deal with the different machines, right? So it has to be looked at and be dealt with on every level in terms of chametz, and in terms of also dat, etc. And Bezrat Hashem, whether you're eating hand or machine, it should be l'shem mitzvah.
Excellent.